Welcome to Conveyancing Matters with Lorraine and Stu. Join us for a chat about all things property.
We're giggling. We shouldn't be giggling at the beginning of Conveyancing Matters, but maybe we should be, because we've got the lovely Russell Quirk, and we're very pleased to have you here, Russell. So welcome. For the conveyancers who don't know who you are, you're a very controversial person in the property world, and the reason that we have asked you to come and talk to us is because of the article that you particularly did in Property Industry Eye in July, the law unto themselves. And if anybody wants to read it, they're more than welcome, because we'll put the links with the output here. So you've got some fairly strong views, Russell, about conveyancers and estate agency and their worlds. So Stu, perhaps over to you to get the ball rolling.
Yeah, so hi Russ, hi Lorraine. I've read with real interest that article and your sort of thoughts on the conveyancing process and whether it's broken, and of course the potential of estate agents carrying out the conveyancing. So from a conveyancer's point of view, that would seem completely alien and completely impossible for a whole host of reasons. But it would just be interesting just to get a rough sort of, rationale as to why you think that would be a good idea and how you think it might work in practice.
Yeah, so the premise of the article that I wrote, and it wasn't about conveyancers, it was about conveyancing. There's a difference, right? So I was talking about the sector, really, and the process. So I've been in the industry a little while, never been a conveyancer. I've always been on the property side, so whether it's estate agency, property development, the public sector side. But the obstacle that I and the rest of the estate agency industry, and indeed the consumer, comes up against time and time again, is what is perceived, and you guys will argue different, is what is perceived to be the conveyancing process. Now, the facts are, and this is what the data says, so forgive me for using facts, they can be inconvenient sometimes, is that the length of time it takes to get from offer to exchange of contracts is at its longest now than it's ever been. So despite email, the telephone, Zoom, document exchange, and so on and so forth, the time it takes a consumer to move, even after the offer's been accepted, is now, it's about 16 weeks. And of course, back in the day, it was 8 to 10 weeks. The whole process now to move, so from the point you put your house on the market, get interest, get an offer, get that accepted, and get through to completion, is about 6 months, it's about the longest period of time in the world, actually. And considering that we're supposed to be a nation of innovators and inventors, and we're supposed to be kind of a smart lot, that kind of sits at odds really with me. And the fact that I suppose I spent a few years trying to change and improve the property industry, in some ways successfully, in some ways unsuccessfully, using process, technology, and so on. So I just had this thought that if you look at this from the consumer point of view, so the buyer and the seller, as well as the agency industry, which, look, you might not want to, and I can understand why conveyancers will look at this process and this subject from the conveyancer's point of view, but I would contend that that's part of the problem. If you keep looking at this from the point of view of the conveyancer, I mean, Rob Hailstone, love him to bits, from Bold, he wrote a follow-up piece a couple of days later in Pie, I think, explaining all of the process and the milestones and the obstacles that everybody in the conveyancing industry has to go through. And I think, look, Rob, it misses the point, right? The consumer doesn't give a toss. The consumer doesn't care about office copy entries. They just don't give a monkeys. In fact, if you ask most people on the street today what a conveyancer is, they won't even know. So, but what they do know is that the moving process, partly fueled by estate agents, and some of them can be, less than adequate, I get that, but also because the conveyancing process, it is less than adequate, and it's getting worse and worse and worse. So my view was that, if you remember, I compared it to the package holiday industry. Back in the 60s and 70s, and obviously I'm far too young to remember back then, but so I read.
Did your nan tell you about that bit, Russell?
Exactly, yes, exactly. From the history books. In the 60s and 70s, if you put together a holiday, you kind of did it yourself, you had no protection, it was very fragmented, it was a pain in the arse. That's where we are now as an industry. So, you choose who you're going to buy through, you choose who you're going to sell through, you then choose your conveyancer, it's all put together piecemeal. And lo and behold, you've got all these kind of competing interests, although they're all supposed to be looking at the same finishing line, the same horizon. We all know that agents and conveyancers and surveyors and mortgage brokers, they end up fighting. There are odds with each other, even though they're all pushing in the same direction. So my solution, as I suggested, was, well, why not let the estate agent be the figurehead, the oracle, the fulcrum of the whole thing. And so when you, as a consumer, again, looking at it from the consumer's point of view, when you go to the agent, it's the agent that lists your home, gets you a buyer, and also undertakes the conveyancing process. And not just recommend a conveyancer, but actually takes the conveyancing in-house, in their office, looks over it, controls it, and ensures, therefore, that as a consequence, it's a more tightly packaged process, and hopefully, as a consequence, more efficient. So that was my idea, which not all conveyancers agree with, it seems.
Who knew? I think clearly there's just a whole load to unpack there, Russell, and we haven't got all day, unfortunately. We could perhaps do this as a series, couldn't we? Volume 1. But I think there's one thing in there. The first thing I wrote down when I looked at your article was, you compared it, you used the travel agency analogy, which of course is interesting, but of course what the whole sort of COVID scenario has shown us is actually the travel agency scenario is pretty broken. Everybody's really jinked off with it. Nobody's getting their refunds. And of course, a point you just made, which I think is absolutely central to this, you said the public isn't protected, the client isn't protected. But of course, when they use a solicitor or a licensed conveyancing firm, that is the central point. They are protected because we are properly insured. And I wonder, with that in mind, I've got something else I want to ask you when Stu's come back in, but one thing I'm really interested to know, because you quite rightly do mention at the end of your article, well, there'd be regulation, of course, that kind of throwaway one-liner. But do you really, really think, on this one point, that agents would be prepared or willing to shoulder the frankly enormous indemnity insurance premiums that solicitors and licensed conveyancers have to pick up to give the public that protection? Because no member of the public will lose money at the hands of a lawyer because they're properly protected. So do you think that's something that the agents would be prepared to step in and deal with?
Yeah, why not? Because it becomes a profit centre for the agents. I'm not talking about the conveyancing being done for nothing, and look, this brings me on to another, maybe a question I'll throw at you guys actually in terms of fees. But yes, of course, if regulation exists within conveyancers and solicitors, there's no reason that can't be transported over to a different entity that oversees the conveyancing process, i.e. the estate agent. And if there's a profit centre within estate agency that then becomes conveyancing, then obviously there's a commercial cover whereby that can be justified. It's that. You say it's a throwaway line. It really is a mere detail. Where that indemnity or where that insurance protection lies in the chain, it's literally just moving a couple of blocks into a different place.
Yeah, I just think, Russell, Stu said, I bet you come back in, Lorraine. But I honestly think that there's going to be a lot of conveyancers watching this now who will be shouting at their screens because their indemnity insurance premiums sort of doubling, which they've done recently.
Why is that, Lorraine? Why is that? What they're doing wrong that necessitates that their premiums are doubling?
Well, I think it's the level of risk that the conveyancers take on, Russell. That's a lot to do with it. It's the level of risk that we carry with the transaction. And of course, it goes back to the point about why things are delayed. And don't get me wrong, I absolutely think there's a lot of dubbed conveyancers out there who could do better. I'm not coming at this from that angle at all. But one of the reasons, because I've been doing this quite a long time too, and was longer than Stu, look at him fresh-faced. And one of the things that's caused the increase in delays is because we have to deal now, this expectation that conveyancers will deal with so much more. My job is to check somebody's title and make sure it's good and marketable. I'm actually, as general proposition, I'm not that interested in fencer certificates, electrical certificates, gas reports, Japanese knotweed and all the rest of it. But they're all the things that have been shoved onto conveyancers in the last 20 years or so, which by definition, if we're pissing about trying to find an NHBC certificate, we're not pushing the transaction along.
But one of the biggest frustrations for agents and the consumer is that all those extra things that you validly talk about and raise there seem to be done consecutively, not simultaneously. The amount of times an agent gets on the phone and says, "Are we ready to exchange?" It's, "Oh no, we're just waiting for a reply to this." You say, "Well, hang on a sec, I thought you raised that 6 weeks ago." "Oh yeah, well, we raised it, we haven't chased it, we just waited until XYZ was in place." Now, you might say that's not true, but my experience as an agent is that happens a lot, where if there's now 50 milestones as opposed to 35 milestones in the process 6 months ago, that's why it's got longer, because as you've just pointed out, it's because those consecutive things all have to be triggered, and there's more of them. Well, why aren't they all done simultaneously, or indeed at the beginning of the process?
I think the answer to that question is that the information that is the trigger point for us to request something is forthcoming at different periods throughout the transaction. So what you might have is you might have standard forms given to you at the start, which is your base, but during the course of the process, you'll have different searches that come in that give you different information. Equally, a client might ask you questions, you might get a bank's valuation come in. All the different information that comes in is a trigger point to maybe requesting additional information. I think what you said there right at the start about the length of time that it takes to complete a purchase, not on the legal side, but to complete a purchase, that process is definitely broken. Of that there is no doubt. Whether the conveyancing process is broken, not quite so sure. In terms of its length, obviously, we should be striving to conclude matters quicker, and property logbooks and completion of information at an earlier point would go a hell of a long way to help him. But whether the actual process is broken, I don't know. And there's numerous clients that benefit from the operation that we conduct. Where you have this period up until exchange of contracts. But just turning to some of the points we were talking about earlier, I still can't really contemplate the point of the agent taking on that additional regulation. And I think one of the big changes that I personally see in the market is actually the estate agent themselves. If you go back probably only 10 years, we use the word traditional agent, online, high street, whatever you want to call them. But, there's the breed of the estate agent has changed massively. And one of the beef that I have a lot of the time with estate agents is in relation to sales chasing and, what they do with that information. And I sometimes think that if I have a conversation with you, Russell, it's a different conversation because, without being rude, you've been around the block, you've operated a number of different models.
Outrageous slur. Yeah.
That was a compliment. But and this is a compliment because, you've got the knowledge to act on the information that might be at your hands. But not all agents would in this day and age. And I think that, there's equal parity whereby there are some conveyancing firms that, haven't moved forward in terms of technology over the years. But I would say the same about the estate agents. You can walk past one estate agent and it's all LED lights and flashing screens with properties revolving in the shop front window, and the one next door has bits of paper they're printed off. So isn't the analogy the same?
Yeah, I know. Look, I'm no defender of the estate agency industry. I'm the guy that tried to kind of fix it and put things right and put things back together as a consequence of what I did back in 2008, 2009 with eMove. Very much part of that was not just cheaper fees, but it was about the process and that more streamlined through operational improvement, through technology and so on. Look, the estate agency sector is as backward as some might say the conveyancing sector is, or the people within it. But we do keep, in this conversation, we do keep coming back to the same old thing, that it's almost we're trying to fix something using the same fabric and framework that we've always had. That's my problem. We should not try and fix it using the same fabric and framework. We need to change the fabric and we need to change the framework. All of these problems point back to the same problem. We're trying to do things the same way as, because conveyancing started in Henry VIII's time. I mean, you guys as conveyancers must know this. It was all about the dissolution of the monasteries in whatever it was, 1560. Conveyancing hasn't really changed since. That's remarkably backward, isn't it?
Well, I don't know, maybe the land registry might disagree. They might shout and say, ooh, digital.
Well, the land registry that takes 3 months to register a completion.
I think
you'd be lucky. 3 months, Russell. Christ, what do you think this is? 3 months? Try doubling it.
Yeah, well, there you go.
One of the things we're coming back to, though, and one of the themes across this conversation to me is really, really obvious. And actually, it's the point you made, Russell, about the number of pinch points. It's the point that Stu made about where they come. We've talked about land registry inefficiencies. We've talked about conveyancing inefficiencies. We've talked about agency inefficiencies. The reality is that actually, and funnily enough, this does come back to the good paying public, because what we're really actually saying, I think, is that across all sectors, there isn't enough resource to do the role cost effectively and profitably within the time frame that people expect.
Well, look, here's a statement. The conveyancing industry has painted itself into a corner on fees.
Don't get me on that one, Russell. You're
But you guys are now going to blame the agents and say, oh yeah, but the agents have squeezed us down. No, we haven't. The likes of ARC Property Lawyers and Rees Fisher Sands that had Google adverts firing saying we're 199 plus VAT. That's what was the race to the bottom. The industry is now won, but the people within the industry have therefore lost. You guys are far, far too cheap, and it is your fault.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I think, and I've watched this for 20 years. The surveyors didn't do it, Russell, to be quite frank. Absolutely, the property lawyers just got in a race to the bottom. I couldn't agree more with that, I have to say. Then
you could blame referral fees. Again, I stood on stage talking about referral fees, and I got a big boo. But then my counter to that, Lorraine, is if there weren't referral fees paid from conveyancers to estate agents for the referral, your alternative would be to go out into the marketing market, i.e. Facebook ads, Google paid ads, and so on. You'd pay far, far more to acquire a customer using Google than you would using an estate agent to refer to you. So there seems to be this kind of ill feeling between conveyancers and agents that referral fees are paid. It really sticks in the throat, I think, from what I can see. But the alternative is worse.
Well,
I don't think that's the case. I don't think there's any, not realistically in this day and age. I don't think if you took an average across law firms that there's a particularly, negative to paying referral fees. We have
on stage, Stu. I was booed on stage.
Yeah, but that's just because you were up there, though. That was me at the back. But I'm not so sure about that. I'm not so sure in this day and age whether the payment of referral fee is and most people coming into the industry now, that's the norm. I mean, this must have been more than 10 years plus that this has been on the arena, and even before that, when I first started, it was more sort of taking people out to lunch or that sort of jazz. So it's just a different medium of doing the same thing. But I don't really think that payment of referral fees is a driver. Maybe that the amount, to a degree, you could question.
It'd be interesting for you guys to do a poll of conveyancers who resents those referral fees. And yes, look, it may be the amount, and the argument is, of course, the more you have to pay agents, therefore the more you charge the customer based on the service that you provide, justifying that increase. But of course, what tends to happen is that the conveyancer takes the hit. They're the ones that therefore reduce their net, so they're ending up on 200 quid for 6 months' work, which is frankly ridiculous.
I mean, I think the point about referral fees, I would agree with you on the Facebook and Google ad thing, Russell, had it not been for the fact that, of course, referral fees have been with us for much longer than payment for ads in that arena have been. So, referral fees have been with us, as you well know, for quite a long time now. Personally, I disagreed with them. I don't think that the genie should have been let out the bottle, but equally, once the genie's out, you can't get it back in. And lots of people said, lots of lawyers, lots of people, much cleverer than me, much higher up the profession than me, said, aren't referral fees a bad idea? Yep, that's why you shouldn't have done them in the first place. But you can't shove it back in once they're out, because it does get. And I'm boring about this, but then I spend my whole life, talking to other people about it and trying to teach it. But you do get to this fundamental point that it's that potential conflict between acting in the client's best interests, and if you're getting a lot of work from one agent or a particular agent, however you get it, actually, whether you get referral fees or whether you pay referral fees or you just get the work in exchange for your probate work or whatever, the bottom line is that if there can be that imbalance, if the agent starts to put a bit of pressure on the firm to get matters through, blah 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 blah, that can be a difficulty. But as I say, I disagree with them, but I'm in something of a minority now, and it's a bit pointless disagreeing. The cost thing is necessarily the issue, actually.
I know estate agents often, because giving a conveyancing firm as a 6-branch independent estate agent I don't know, 100 grand's worth of conveyancing a year, and at Christmas getting taken out for a steak and a bottle of wine. That was the alternative. That's when I started in the industry. Or a box of Quality Street at Easter.
Well, really, is that really true though, Russell?
No, it bloody was. When I was at Canvey, I mean, I'll tell you, that's what David Hook and Partners used to entertain Anthony and I. There were no referral fees back in 2000.
Yeah, but how much probate work did you get from them?
Oh, probably one every 2 or 3 months. Hardly comparable. Hardly equitable.
Yeah, I mean that's that's the thing though, isn't it? It's which direction the work is going in, I think, and of course, organisations have to look at the bottom line.
It had to balance out, and I think it has. But I guess my point is, it's up to the conveyancing industry to regulate that. It's up to the conveyancing industry to say no.
No, genie's out the bottle. That won't happen. That absolutely won't happen.
I don't mean to the principle of referral fees. I mean the amount. So, but look, regardless, my view is, because I remember a conveyancer saying to me once, it's not fair because you as the agent are earning 10 times more, it wasn't used to, 10 times more than we do as the conveyancer. I said, well, whose fault's that? It's not my fault. I'll get as much as I can, and the consumer will push you down as low as possible. That's markets. That's what happens in any free market, whether you're selling rugs or baked beans, doesn't make any difference. But it's up to you, not just to say no, but also to justify to the consumer why you're more expensive, and that represents good value. That's the thing.
And that's, of course, I think what a lot of lawyers aren't any good at.
Yep.
To be fair.
Yeah. So don't boo me on stage. Take a more inward look at yourselves.
Just be a bit more zen. Be a bit more zen about it. Stu, what was your point about the lenders?
Well, if we go back to sort of one of the original points, and the qualification that we hold, of course, that's paramount till the banks and us being on the panel, acting on bank science for. I cannot see a world whereby any other body would be able to do the conveyancing purely on the basis that the banks wouldn't have it.
Well, but the estate agent can become qualified. But basically, what would happen is the estate agents would be employing you lot.
Well,
silence. Seriously, that's what would happen. The estate agent would employ the conveyancers.
But Russ, that could happen right now.
I know. That's what I'm asking.
But nobody's done it.
I know.
Why would?
Yeah.
But Russ, why with that increased resource within that agency umbrella, which whatever business model you have?
So it would be more seamless in terms of that choice, that relationship, that interaction, because the consumer then has one point of call, not two. So
there's no choice though. There's no choice for lawyer then. What if the consumer wants to go somewhere else?
If they want to go somewhere else, there'll still be lawyers, I guess, that want to go and spend 500 quid acquiring a customer on Google or using Facebook ads. So I'm not saying there should be the law. I'm just saying that there should be a free market alternative whereby it's contained within the estate agency business. So, but also from an agency point of view, it's much more efficient, because at the moment you've got this ridiculous paradox almost, where you've got the conveyancer running towards the finishing line and the estate agent doing the same next to the conveyancer, and normally characterized by a sales progressor. And the sales progressor, excuse my silly analogy here, but the sales progressor and the conveyancer are running in the same direction, but every now and again bashing into each other, right? That's what's happening. So if you take one of them out and just have one of them doing the sales progression, conveyancing under the guise of the agent, no one's bashing into each other, so that's more efficient. But also, you haven't got the cost of the second person running alongside them. So from the estate agency point of view, this is something that Stu, I'm amazed this hasn't happened. Maybe it will.
But the point is, Russell, it did. I mean, when I first came into the profession, there were solicitors on the high street under the roof of estate agents, and as a model, and this was back. I know it's shocking to understand, but that was back in the early 90s. But as a model, that hasn't taken off.
I remember it was Leonard Gray and Sons in Chelmsford that were the first estate agency solicitor that I ever came across, and they were solicitors first that became estate agents, so kind of the other way around. I'm not sure it makes any difference. The precedent is Scotland, of course. In Scotland you have property law centres where it is all contained within one entity. That seems to work okay, doesn't it?
Why is that? But why is Scotland better for the consumer though? Because quite often, I mean, not that I absolutely don't know much about the Scottish system, so I'm quite prepared to be wrong here. But from what I understand of the Scottish system, people put their sort of unknown offers for an unknown price in an unknown metaphorical envelope, having spent perhaps thousands of pounds on surveys that are duds for properties they're never going to get. So I don't quite see why that is better.
That's great for the seller, isn't it? If it's blind like that, then you don't end up with someone topping your bid by 100 quid. You potentially end up with someone topping your bid by 10 grand. The benefit of the Scottish system is there's no fall-throughs.
Yeah, but no, but I just think the fall through rate is at a different point. I'm not sure there's much that's advertised about the amount of money that potential buyers will have spent surveying properties that they want to put offers on, that then crash and burn.
I'm not sure that's a disadvantage. I mean, that's a disadvantage to the buyer, but the alternative is a disadvantage to the seller. And as estate agents, we are legally bound to the best interest of the seller. So it accords with our whole professional, legal and moral ethos that system actually would be to the benefit of the seller. So, I mean, but there's a way around that. There's an easy way around that. And that is that, remember the old home information packs, which were a genius idea, and Ruth, whatever her name was, who was the front bench of the Labour government at the time, completely cocked up. We should have home information packs. And within that home information pack was a contract and a property information questionnaire and a survey, a proper survey paid for by the seller, that if you wanted to, you could look at. Now, in this digital age, you could have that sitting on the estate agent's website, couldn't you? Wow, shock horror. All the information that I want up front, so I can see exactly what this property is all about before I offer on it. That
does come back, Russell. Well, you actually neatly swerved my question about, well, why, agents and solicitors under the same roof, have happened and they didn't work. But let's move on.
I don't know. I look, maybe that was operational. Maybe they didn't market it well enough. Maybe the conveyancing lobby got scared and, I don't know, spoke to their friends at government. I don't know.
We're all too busy looking down, heads down. We haven't got time to do that. But of course, this the whole HIPS point. Now, I'll pass this point on to Stu. The whole home information packs point that crashed and burned. Apart from the fact that
that was political, Lorraine. That was political. That wasn't practical. It was political.
It was also one of the big issues from our perspective is that the home information packs didn't take off because the lenders wouldn't accept a survey produced by the seller. Kind of goes straight back to Stu's lender.
I think, wasn't it because John Prescott couldn't keep his trousers on?
Oh, don't even start. I was, do you know what?
That's what happened.
I was heavily pregnant when the HIPS thing was going on, and I actually, this is absolutely true, I had to stop watching the telly because I used to get so mad, my heart rate would go up because I used to get so mad listening to John Prescott talk such cobblers on the telly that I would actually be shouting at the telly.
Well, and not just on the telly, but everywhere John Prescott goes, he talks cobblers.
I just had to I had to zone out. And
but again, that's the reason was, so there'd been a change of government. John Prescott then got booted out as Deputy Prime Minister. Ruth, whatever her name was, took over and had to be seen to do something different. And she yielded to a lot of pressure, I think. There was a lot of pressure, Nick Salmon and others in the estate agency industry saying no to HIPS, again, because they didn't want the status quo. They were beset with inertia. They didn't want to see progress. We want to stay in this kind of 18th century dynamic. It's just madness. So that's why that didn't work, not because it didn't work, if you know what I mean.
Well, I think, yeah, but I still think it comes back to the lenders. If the lenders hadn't sort of vetoed the seller survey, they would have had a much better chance of success. What do you think, Stu?
The government could have legislated against that.
Yeah,
I think you're linking everything into the same boat here. We talked earlier, we mentioned earlier, sort of property logbooks, which is the same theory of the HIP, and the analogy that Russell used with two people running alongside each other and occasionally sort of hitting. We could sort of turn that into a real sort of practical conversation and talk about things such as ID and money laundering. There should be synergy between the agent and the lawyer because the logic to me is that, the client comes on board, they're buying somewhere, the agent might ask for their ID, they might ask for bank statements. The broker or the bank will then say to the client, can I have some ID? Can I have some bank statements? And then finally, the lawyer jumps on the bandwagon and says, can I have some ID? Can I have some bank statements? So there is that sort of, you're bringing everything into the same pot here. And I don't know what your thoughts are, Russell, on the boards that you sit on, but, a property logbook surely has to be a way forward prior to the property being marketed.
Well, a property logbook, but in this day and age, you now have the digital capability to store all of that information that the conveyancer needs and the consumer needs in one place. Look, and to your point, Lorraine, about HM Land Registry, with Digital Street, they've made some inroads to try and do that. But if you were to put everything in one place at the beginning in a digital vault that people could access, maybe at a cost, maybe that was just a conveyancer, maybe partly that upfront information that's centralised would circumvent many of these problems. That obviously needs the digital will, the commercial will to do that, and also a bit of legislation, I think. But then the other problem is that making sure that people, as a consumer, the buyers are then made to stay the course rather than playing the system. Because we all know that if you're not contracted for the first 8 to 10 weeks of a transaction, you might go into that transaction without proper good intent. So you might not actually intend to go ahead with it, but there's nothing to lose from going ahead with it initially. Or indeed, mid-transactions, as we all see every day, you see ultimatums thrown around left, right and centre. That needs to change too. And the only way you do that is making someone more contractually obligated at the beginning of the transaction, which of course is what Scotland have done, and the US and New Zealand and France and Germany and Spain and Italy. I could go on and on and on. There is nothing wrong with saying to a buyer, you really want to buy this? Okay, put your money where your mouth is. Not a week before moving day, not in 3 months' time, but at a much, much earlier stage. But you can only do that if the information that contract relies upon is up front.
I absolutely agree. I think though, Russell, what I always tend to, and actually where I often find up, we end up in these, in Stu and I's sort of Conveyancing Matters chats, actually, to my mind, my rather dull one-track mind, it is then all a question of liability, and particularly where does liability lie in the event of fraud. Of course, the digital revolution is going to sweep us all along, whatever. And of course, asking clients, 3, 4, 5 different pinch points across a transaction for the same information is nonsense. But at the moment, we can't rely, the conveyancer can't rely on ID produced by the mortgage broker or ID produced by the agent. And the bottom line is, if there's ID fraud or, digital signatures, and that's another classic with the land registry. The land registry said, hey, yeah, digital signatures, go for it, guys. I specifically tweeted the land registry and said, where does the liability lie in the event of fraud? It took them 8 hours to come back to say, oh, well, not the land registry. No shit, Sherlock.
It can all be insured, can't it? All of that can be insured.
It's all, but that's the point. It's, as I say, the question at the moment is, or the point at the moment is, the liability all lies on the conveyancer. And I think unless and until there's some sort of, tacit acceptance and or legislation that's got to change, then pretty much everything else that we're suggesting won't.
But that's what's happening in the US. The big thing in the US is title insurance, and it's about $1,000 a time.
Yeah, and of course, but that would then set the conveyancers alight, because 3/4 of them wouldn't have a job. Maybe.
Sorry, Lorraine, is there anything that doesn't set conveyancers alight?
No.
Sets Stu and I alight, as you can imagine, but not sure it's conveyancing. But mate, well, we've been talking for half an hour, so maybe is that a good time to thank Russell for coming along? Stu, anything else you want to ask him?
No, not at all. No, I think if we ask any more questions, we'll be talking for another half hour, won't we? So probably best to leave this one today, and we'll do another one shortly, maybe.
Oh, well, thanks ever so much for coming, Russell. I don't think you've convinced us, but thanks.
Okay, well, I didn't think I would, but you're always going to be a tough audience, but I appreciate you inviting me on. Thank you.
Not at all. Thanks for coming.
Take care.